Okay, so for the first Marvel Monday of 2022, I'm going to be taking a look at the recently released X-Force Triple Pack. This special release is, of course, part of the ever-expanding Marvel Legends line, and it's quite a welcome release since it introduces one of the key X-Force characters who's never made an appearance in this line before, which is fantastic. So this is Richter, and we get a couple of variants of figures that we've had before, but not quite like this. And I think this set is one that's really geared towards the hardcore fan, especially those of us who grew up in the 90s, because X-Force has been largely revamped and the original lineup has been quite forgotten, I think, in recent years. But the title was quite a big deal upon its launch. Obviously, it was created and drawn by Rob Liefeld back in those early 90s when X-Men were the biggest thing in comic books at the time, bigger even than Spider-Man, and they were ever increasing new titles. The line was broadening and growing all the time. We had X-Men, we have Uncanny X-Men, we had X-Factor, we had the New Mutants, who of course became X-Force, and so on. And of course, Rob Liefeld was one of those superstar artists that had the Midas touch. And I think the idea of X-Force was to give him sort of free reign to do all the stuff that he wanted to do. Now, I think there were some disagreements behind the scenes, and that's another story altogether. But certainly, I remember picking up the first, at least 12 or 13 issues and being really into the art, if not so much the characters. I did really love Cable and Deadpool, and I really liked Domino as well. And then some of the others took a little bit of warming to, I think. But the art was really dynamic and explosive, and that was a huge driver back then, so it seemed super impressive to my child eyes, and yeah, it's something I definitely grew up having a fondness for. And in recent years, Hasbro have been drip-feeding us X-Force characters in the Marvel Legends line. Now, it's taken quite a few years, but we're very, very close now to having a full lineup thanks to this box set. So let's start off by looking at the packaging. It is that sort of big window display with the figures laid out all next to each other that we've seen a handful of times before now from Hasbro. This is fairly attractive packaging. It's okay. It's a little bit bland. Obviously, it does have the black borders, but it is mainly focused on the window display. For the side panel, they've opted to put 90s trading card style images on the side. So I think this looks pretty attractive, even though these images are fairly small here, but they are thankfully replicated on the reverse of the packaging and blown up to a nice, healthy, colourful size there. So these are nice and clear images. I think these may have actually been literal trading cards. I'm not sure, but certainly the images look like they're from the 90s. I remember collecting trading cards like this all through the 90s, which is brilliant, and I love these kind of images. So this is a nice nostalgic nod to that time, and this works very well for me, and I think makes for quite a nice attractive display piece too. So let's start off with Richter, because as I said at the top of the video, this is the first time this character has ever seen life in the Marvel Legends line, and certainly in the 6-inch scale, which is fantastic. So he makes a very welcome addition to the team. And I think the head sculpt is really decent. I think they've done a very good job with this and bringing it to life. If I had a criticism though, it would be that this is a figure that doesn't really have a lot of paint washes running through it, so that does tend to weaken what is pretty much a fantastic mold otherwise, and they really could have accentuated this and just enhanced it. This is something I've seen quite a lot with Hasbro over the past year, where they've got fantastic sculpts, and I just wish they made the most of it by just putting a wash through it to just really enhance all those grooves and cracks and things like that. And you know, just looking at the hair on this figure, if they just had a wash going through, it would just make it look so much better. Especially because so much effort has gone into making a fantastic sculpt and making them very authentic, which is it's a shame they just don't really capitalise on that a bit more. Again, we can see this in sort of the arm piece there at the top of the arm with the tassels, just a wash going through that would just really enhance that. Likewise on the belt with the pouches, that could just be slightly improved with just a little bit more colour. Could really help this figure. But overall, I think they've done a very nice job with this. All the pieces come together. There's nothing loose on him at all. It all looks really authentic. It looks just like it does in the comic book, which is great, and the colours are really nice as well. And this carries through right down to the legs and the feet as well, and I think there's some unique parts here as well. I've never seen these boots before, at least not in any of the figures that I own, but I appreciate there's an awful lot out there that I might have missed, but this looks new to me. I've never seen these particular boots in this size or scale, and I've never seen these spikes around the feet either, so I think this is all new pieces, which is fantastic. The articulation scheme is the usual high standard we've come to expect from Marvel Legends, so he has the ball jointed head there, which allows his head to spin from side to side and look up and down. Now, unfortunately, his hard hair, which is one solid plastic piece, combined with the plastic bandana, which again is one solid piece going with the shoulder pads, does conspire to really limit the amount of motion we can get out of the head. So he can turn it from side to side just about, but you cannot really look up and down, which is a real shame. Now he does have the ball jointed shoulders, and they're allowed to kick up to the level of the shoulder pads, which again, a bit disappointing, but it's still a good range of motion there. He's got the bicep swivel, the double jointed elbows, and of course the pin swivel at the wrist. So there's plenty going on in the arms. You can certainly get him in all the positions you're going to want to get him in, but he is hindered a little bit there. Likewise, he's got a swivel at the waist, which is great, so he can spin right the way around if you want him to, and he's also got the ab crunch as well, meaning he can arc backwards and forwards, and there's actually a pretty good solid range of motion here. He can look really quite a good distance down and up as well, which is pretty good. He's got the ball jointed hips, so of course his legs can kick out to the side and they can kick forwards and backwards as well, which is fantastic. But he's also got that upper thigh swivel there as well, which is great stuff. Now he's got the double jointed knees, so of course they bend right the way back there, which is fantastic. And he's also got the ankle pivot as well, so it can move from side to side, and again it can hinge forwards and backwards. And I'm pleased to say he comes with some extras as well. So of course he comes with an extra pair of hands. These are his flat clapping hands, which are really important to this character. And he also has these special effects as well, these energy effects, which are really, really cool. The one thing I do have to criticise the figure for, though, is the fact that no matter how hard I tried, I cannot get his hands together, which is kind of crucial for this character. The whole point is that he claps his hands together and it causes earthquakes and various disruption. And it just seems like such a pivotal thing that's really important to get right with this figure that I just couldn't get them together. And I think what this figure really needed was one of those butterfly joints in the shoulders to allow the arms to come around a lot more in the chest to really allow that to close that gap so they can touch. Sadly, this is as close as I could get them. It's still a very cool looking figure. I still really like it. I'm really glad to have the character in the lineup. That's key, absolutely brilliant. And I think they've done a very nice job with him otherwise. But yeah, that is a huge feature that I really want to see in this figure. So for me, that's definitely cost him a star or two. So I think this is a 3-star figure. Okay, so next up we have Domino. Now this is a variant because we've had a couple of Domino figures in the past in the line, one from Toy Biz and one from Hasbro, but neither of them have ever been in this costume and neither of them have ever had this sort of headpiece that she has, which again tends to be how I think of this character. Mainly because this is what she was wearing when I was introduced to the character in those early X-Force comics. Now, I think they've done a pretty decent job with this sculpt. I quite like the shoulder pads. I think they've done a nice job with them. And the head sculpt works pretty well. The only thing that works against it, and I don't know whether it's just mine, but the little microphone, the mouthpiece that curls around seems to obscure her face quite a bit. It sticks out a little bit. It doesn't look quite right, to be honest. I feel as if that maybe should have been a little bit shorter so it doesn't quite touch the other side of the headpiece because it does obscure her mouth and it doesn't look quite right to me. Now the central body mold is one we've seen many times before because obviously this is the key one they use for their female figures in the main and it's a pretty solid sculpt. It does the trick pretty much 9 times out of 10, so I think this is a really good mold. I'm quite happy with it. Obviously the chest piece is new. It's got obviously the buttons at the top, and of course on the arms we have some of that extra molding there with the pads which looks pretty solid. But she does also have a utility belt which is a loose piece. I'm not against this. I think it's quite nice that it is a separate piece in the main. However, the way it's been painted, it is obviously just moulded in that purple plastic, which looks a little bit cheap, a little bit flimsy. Again, it would have benefited hugely from a nice paint wash just to make it look a little bit more authentic. But as it is, it's fine. It does the job, but it's, yeah, not fantastic. So in terms of the articulation, I'm pleased to say that the ball jointed head works really very well on Domino. She can turn her head all the way around, she can look up and down, a really good range of motion here. Pretty much fantastic stuff. I can't really fault this. This is brilliant stuff. Now she's got the ball jointed shoulders of course, and thankfully those shoulder pads are a little bit more flexible, a little bit more giving, and she's got the bicep swivel there as well, and of course the double jointed elbow. Now something to be aware of is that these joints tend to be quite rubbery, a little bit soft, so they can feel like there's an awful lot of resistance when you're trying to bend them, so be careful when you are bending them, because there's this a little bit of resistance there. It always feels like the joint's maybe going to tear or break off. It hasn't, but I'm not always comfortable with this feeling. I don't like it. She does of course have the pin swivel at the wrist as well, and she also has that fantastic ball joint in the chest there, which allows her to swivel from side to side, look arch from left to right, and of course look up and down a little bit as well, which is pretty good stuff. Again, we've got those ball jointed hips. Of course, the legs kick out, there's the upper thigh swivel, and the legs kick forwards, backwards, and again we have double jointed knees. And again, same issue as with the arms really. There's a little bit of resistance here, a little bit rubbery feel to the legs, which is a little bit frustrating, but nevertheless it works perfectly well. And she's got the ankle pivot, which of course moves from side to side and arcs up and down. I'm pleased to report that she also does come fully loaded with a couple of guns, which is great. She has this big sort of assault rifle or shotgun, whatever it's meant to be. That's pretty cool. And she also has this smaller sort of hand blaster as well. And I'm particularly pleased to see these, because this definitely rocks her look from those early comics. This looks really spot on, and they're nicely painted. There's not an awful lot of paint application to them, but they're nicely moulded, and there's a little bit of silver paint on there to make enhance them, which is pretty cool. And yeah, she holds them perfectly well. They're nice and solid in her grip, and she even gets her finger onto the triggers, which is solid stuff. So overall thoughts, I think I'm going to give her 3 stars. This is a pretty solid release. I really like the sculpt. I think the colouring's very nice. It's definitely caught the essence of the character. Like I said, I really like these accessories as well. I think they've done a very nice job of it. But that being said, there's a couple of drawbacks to this figure in my opinion. First of all, as unfortunately is so often the case with Marvel Legends these days, I really feel they could use a bit of a paint wash. The sculpts are really fantastic, and I just think they need to capitalise on that a little bit more with just a paint wash running through these, just to enhance the little details. So a paint wash on the utility belt, just a little bit of something that's just really draw out those little details, you know, that would make such a difference to a figure like this. Also, I'm not overly keen on the material they've used for her joints. There's that slightly rubbery feel, which feels like you're getting a lot of resistance there, and there's always a sense that maybe they'll tear off in some way. Now, they never have, but that said, I don't like that feeling. That definitely distracts a little bit for me. And then finally, probably the greatest sin with this figure is the headpiece, and the fact that sort of that microphone bit just seems a little bit too long, like it just covers her face too much, which kind of ruins the aesthetic of this figure. And then finally we turn our attention to Cannonball, and Cannonball I think is probably the most controversial figure in this pack. And that's because already we've had this Cannonball figure released by Hasbro just a couple of years ago. And at the time that release seemed a little bit strange, because basically it was Cannonball but without legs. He came with the flame effect but no actual legs, so he was kind of limited as an action figure in terms of posability and whatnot. At the time I was accepting of it. After all, that was his mutant power. It was a cool effect. I didn't mind it, but it did feel like we were a little bit shortchanged, like this should have been an accessory as opposed to just not having his normal functioning legs as well. So it kind of feels like this release is in fact the release that many of us wanted 2 or 3 years ago, and he's finally arrived in this 3-pack. So make of that what you will. But there are a few significant changes with this figure. So for a start, he has a different head sculpt. As we can see, the goggles are actually completely different here. These are big, thick goggles with that silver paint over them, which is quite nicely done. The facial expression is different as well. And whilst the basic mould of the upper torso is exactly the same, the colourings are very different. So we have a lot more detail here. So for a start, his undershirt is purple rather than the white. And of course, we can see that he's got the pockets that are shaded in now with the silver. And crucially, of course, he does have the legs as well. So we see the full costume, which looks pretty cool. I think they've done a nice job with this, keeping the paint consistent and the overall colour scheme and design being very consistent and authentic with what we see in the comics. Now, in terms of the articulation scheme, of course, there aren't any real surprises here. He's got the ball jointed neck, he can look up and down, a huge difference, he can spin his head right the way around, and there's a fantastic range of motion here. So top marks for this. He's got the ball jointed shoulders, he's got the upper bicep swivel, and he's got the double jointed elbows as well, and of course the pin swivel at the wrist. So this is all pretty much what we'd seen in the other figures, but it's all good stuff. He's also got the swivel at the waist, so of course he can spin from side to side right the way around, but he's also got the ab crunch as well at the top of the chest there, so of course he can lean forwards and he can lean backwards, and again there's a very good range of motion when it comes to leaning forwards and not bad when it comes to leaning backwards. So pretty solid stuff here as well. Ball jointed hips, of course, the legs kick out, there's the upper thigh swivel, and the legs kick forwards, backwards, with the double jointed knees. So all good stuff, and he's got extra articulation because he actually has a swivel at the top of the boot cut there, which is great, and then the ankle pivots as well. And yes, he does come with some accessories, so you'll be pleased to know he does come with the same blast effect, although this is a variant, and we'll touch on that in a moment. And he also comes with an alternate head, and this is the original sculpt that we got in the first release. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time out now to compare the two releases to see how they stack up against each other and see what changes have been made. So here they both are. Obviously, on the left hand side we have this new release from the special X-Force triple pack, and then on the right hand side we have the original Wendigo Bath series version of Cannonball. So as you can see, the blast effect is the same mould, but it is painted very differently. As we can see, the new release has a lot more depth and colour going on. There's a lot more paint apps. There's a huge change from the base to the top. We can actually see some white smoke at the top there. So there's definitely a stronger impression of that blast effect, which looks really very, very good. The original release is more of a translucence colour, so it's more see-through, and it's still a very good mould, and obviously still works very well. But I think when you put them side by side like this, for me, my personal preference is the new release. I just think there's a lot more love and care and attention gone into the paint apps on this to make it look a little bit more impressive. And to see how they compare when we have a light behind them, to see how the light comes through this translucent plastic, we can see even on the newly painted one, that light does come through quite nicely. It glows up with that lovely warm light there, so you still get that effect. However, the original release is consciously a lot more translucent, so the light really comes through a lot more clear, a lot stronger, but really it's up to you what you prefer. Now, comparing the two upper bodies, we can see the real differences in the paint apps. The molds, of course, are identical, but really it's just a question of colouring here. So the shirt is your preference, whether it's the purple or the white. I think probably the white is more striking, more visually impressive, but you also notice that the jackets are slightly different tones of purple. Like the original release is obviously a darker purple, this new release is a lighter purple. Meanwhile, the gloves or gauntlets, obviously very different colours as well. We have brown versus the new grey. And what we can see on this new release is just a little bit more attention, a few more paint apps running through that jacket. So although the mould is exactly the same, we can see that on the pockets and at the top of the lapels, there's a little bit more silver and grey just peppered on the new release, just to give it a bit more visual flair, a bit more interest, which I think is a very nice touch. And just to compare both of these head sculpts, so the spare head in this case, as you can see, is exactly the same as the previous release, but the colouring is slightly different here in terms of the paint apps. There's certainly more of a wash running through the original release's hair, so there's a bit darker, and likewise there's a lighter brown used over the actual colouring of the straps, but also the goggles themselves are a slightly different colour as well. But nevertheless, I'm pleased to throw in this extra head. So what I'd say is I'm not quite sure which is the better release. I certainly like the colouring of the base more on this new release, and I certainly really like that we get his extra pair of legs as well. I think that's really cool. So all in all, I would say that this is the superior release, and I think if you didn't get Cannonball first time around, then this is probably the release you're going to want to get your hands on. If you've already bought him previously, I still think this is an upgrade and probably worth the double dip. In conclusion then, I think Cannonball, I think he deserves 4 stars. I think the paint apps are very nice, the articulation's fantastic, and of course the extra features there, being able to obviously have the blast effect, the alternate head, are all really good candidates, and I think this is a really nice solid figure, and they've done a very, very nice job with him. So yeah, this is definitely a 4-star figure in my opinion. So I'm pleased to say we've very nearly completed the full roster for X-Force. There's really only 2 characters from the original lineup that we're missing here, and obviously one of them is Wolfsbane and of course Siren, and I believe that we will be getting a Siren figure this year, fingers crossed, so hopefully by the end of 2022 we'll be that much closer to having a full lineup, and I would really hope that actually by the end of the year we also get this Wolfsbane and actually complete the full team. That would be absolutely fantastic. So if you are an X-Force fan, I'm afraid I think this set is a must-buy. Certainly if you're a fan of the original lineup there, the 90s conception, then you're probably going to want these. You're going to want this version of Domino. You're going to want Cannonball with obviously his legs and the new paint apps. And crucially, you're going to need Richter to fill out your full roster. So I think really if you're a fan, you're going to want this. Overall, I think this is a fairly solid set. It's not going to set the world aflame. It's not the greatest range of Marvel Legends figures I've got in my collection, but it is a very pleasing set. They've done a nice job with them, and I think they're all good figures. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.